They called him the Special One. Not just a nickname, it was a prophecy. He walked into Chelsea in 2004 like a man who already knew the ending of every match. He didn't just beat giants, he dismantled them. At Porto, at Inter, at Real Madrid, he didn't inherit greatness. He built it, brick by tactical brick. He taunted legends, silenced stadiums, and stared down the biggest names in football, and he usually won. But if you look at Mourinho now, standing on the sidelines of smaller clubs, throwing glances at a game that has moved on without him, you begin to wonder, when did football stop fearing the Special One? How did a man once worshipped for his intellect and charisma, the master of mind games, the champion of underdogs, become a relic of his own past? What happened between the smirking genius of the early 2000s and the bitter, isolated figure we see today? There's a story no one really tells. Not the press conferences, not the trophies, not even the scandals. This is about a man who climbed too fast, fought too many battles, and in the end was left alone on his hilltop. And maybe, just maybe, he lost something more than just the dressing room. To understand José Mourinho, you must forget the caricature, the provocateur, the parked bus, the snarling face under a dark trench coat. That image crafted over time is only the surface. Beneath it lies the story of a man born not into glory, but into expectation, and who spent his life turning other people's doubts into fuel. He was born in Setúbal, Portugal, in 1963, the son of Félix Mourinho, a professional goalkeeper who later became a coach. Young Jose wasn't a star on the field. In fact, he was barely a footnote as a player, but his mind was sharp, observant. He read the game with a tactician's eye, even when sitting on the bench. When his father was fired as a coach, young Jose began keeping detailed notes, diagrams, and tactical observations, an obsession that would define his life. But the world didn't take kindly to a nobody with a clipboard. Football was a world of icons, not intellectuals. So Mourinho had to infiltrate the system not as a player, but as a translator. Yes, a translator. In the early 1990s, he joined Bobby Robson's coaching staff at Sporting Lisbon and then followed him to Porto and Barcelona. Mourinho translated Robson's words to the players, but soon he began translating ideas. He wasn't just a mouthpiece. He was absorbing, evolving, crafting his own vision. By the time he worked under Louis van Gaal at Barcelona, he was already more than an assistant. He was a student becoming a master. And in 2000, he took over Benfica as head coach for just 9 games. He walked away voluntarily. Why? Because the club wouldn't guarantee his future. That moment told the world everything they needed to know. Mourinho would never be anyone's second choice again. It wasn't until Porto, however, that the legend was truly born. Between 2002 and 2004, he turned a modest Portuguese side into European champions. He won the UEFA Cup, then he won the Champions League. And the football world from Milan to Madrid to Manchester suddenly stood still. It wasn't just the wins, it was how he won. He spoke with swagger, dismissing journalists and mocking rival managers. When he arrived at Chelsea in 2004 and called himself a special one, the press laughed, but that laughter stopped when he delivered back-to-back Premier League titles. With players like Drogba, Lampard, and Terry under his command, Chelsea didn't just play, they executed. His era at Inter Milan was even more astonishing. In 2010, he delivered the first treble in Italian football history. He made players like Sneijder, Cambiaso, and Milito look like world beaters. He beat Barcelona, the greatest team of that generation, with tactical discipline that bordered on cruel efficiency. Then came Real Madrid, the Galacticos, the politics, the pressure. He broke Pep Guardiola's Barcelona streak in La Liga with a record 100-point season. But along the way, he fractured the dressing room. He clashed with Iker Casillas. He benched stars. He made enemies of legends. The Mourinho era was now fully formed, brilliant, combative, and increasingly volatile. He returned to Chelsea and again won the Premier League, but the storm clouds had begun to gather. His methods no longer surprised anyone. Players were beginning to tire. His bunker mentality, once a weapon, was becoming a burden. By the time he reached Manchester United and Tottenham, something had changed. The tactical genius was still there, but the magic wasn't. He no longer inspired fear. He no longer adapted. Instead, he seemed to cling to the past, to old glories, to a football world that no longer existed. And yet, in every era he touched, from the early 2002 to the late 2010 he left fingerprints. His name alone could fill stadiums. His shadow loomed large over every manager who came after. But behind the achievements, behind the trophies, something darker was brewing. Something even he might not have seen coming. José Mourinho didn't fall like most football figures do gradually. With grace and fading relevance, he crashed in full view of the world, with the cameras still rolling and the microphones still live. But to understand his fall, you must first understand how spectacularly he rose. At Porto, he wasn't just winning, he was rewriting expectations. He crafted a Champions League winning team with limited resources, proving to the world that tactics and belief could trump money and heritage. Then, at Chelsea, he became a god. In just his first season, he transformed a club that hadn't won a league title in 50 years into a ruthless machine, conceding only 15 goals across an entire league season, a Premier League record that still stands. Everywhere he went, he turned ordinary players into legends. Frank Lampard called him a father figure. Didier Drogba once said he would run through walls for Mourinho. He didn't just build teams, he built loyalty. His charisma wasn't a media act, it was a weapon, carefully deployed in press rooms and training grounds alike. But success has a price, and with Mourinho, it was always sustainability. His relationships with players, once tight-knit, began to fray. The very intensity that inspired undying loyalty also bred resentment when things went wrong, and they always went wrong eventually. The first cracks showed at Real Madrid. Despite breaking Barcelona's hegemony and winning La Liga with a record 100 points, he left behind a fractured squad. His feud with Iker Casillas, a national icon in Spain, alienated fans and players alike. Rumors emerged of silent treatment, psychological games, and even betrayal. He was like a volcano, one Madrid insider said. You never knew when he would erupt. When he returned to Chelsea in 2013, it felt like a redemption arc. He won the league again in 2015, but the downfall came swiftly. The 2015-16 season was a disaster. Chelsea, reigning champions, slumped to 16th place by December. Mourinho, increasingly paranoid and combative, clashed with everyone, referees, media, even his own staff. His notorious conflict with Eva Carneiro, the club's doctor, turned into a scandal. After she ran onto the pitch to treat Eden Hazard without Mourinho's approval, he publicly criticized her. The backlash was immediate, and lawsuits followed. It wasn't just a moment of poor judgment, it was a window into a man who had lost control. By December, Mourinho was sacked. Again. His next stop was Manchester United, another sleeping giant, desperate for resurrection. At first, it looked promising. He won the Europa League, the League Cup, and finished second in the Premier League, their best result since Sir Alex Ferguson's retirement. But even in success, there was tension. He called second place one of his greatest achievements, not out of pride, but resentment. He criticized the club's transfer policy, questioned the mentality of his players, and began to publicly humiliate individuals, most notably Paul Pogba, whom he benched and mocked in front of the media. The players stopped playing for him, the fans stopped believing, the board pulled the trigger. Then came Tottenham Hotspur, a curious move, and perhaps a last gamble. Mourinho promised he had changed, that he had learned, that he would evolve. He didn't. The football was stale, the tactics outdated, and the spark never lit. He alienated players like Dele Alli, lost key matches in the league, and just days before a cup final, a chance at silverware. Spurs had waited decades for he was fired. No farewell match, no last stand, just gone. Each chapter followed the same rhythm, a meteoric rise, a brilliant peak, and then a sharp, bitter descent. But this wasn't just about tactics. This wasn't about football evolving. Something deeper was unraveling. Something personal. Behind every press conference jab, every smug smirk, every quote etched in Premier League folklore, "If I speak, I am in big trouble." There was a man who was slowly drowning in the weight of his own creation. For years, José Mourinho had weaponized conflict. He thrived on it. He used it to build trenches in dressing rooms, to bind players to him against the outside world. He created a them versus US mentality that worked until it didn't. Because at some point when the results stop coming, us turns into just him. The truth is, Mourinho became addicted to being misunderstood. He needed the world to doubt him so he could prove it wrong. But over time, he stopped fighting for greatness and started fighting for relevance. Insiders began to talk about how lonely he had become. Friends in football faded. His once loyal lieutenants grew distant. Rui Faria, his longtime assistant who had followed him from Porto to Madrid, left after Manchester United. They had spent 17 years together. Mourinho never replaced him. Not truly. There's a quote Mourinho once gave, not in anger, not in victory, but quietly, to an interviewer when asked what he feared most. "I fear being forgotten." This wasn't a man who just wanted to win. This was a man terrified of disappearing. And slowly, the world around him began to change. Football evolved. Gegenpressing, inverted fullbacks, ball-playing goalkeepers. Younger managers like Nagelsmann, Arteta, and Xabi Alonso were speaking a different language. Pep Guardiola, his eternal rival, built dynasties based not on war, but on joy, fluidity, and control. Mourinho, meanwhile, still spoke in metaphors of enemies, traps, betrayals. His tactics became outdated, but worse, his mentality became exhausting. Even fans who once idolized him began to question, was the pain worth the silverware? His public behavior grew more erratic. He made Instagram posts mocking referees. He delivered post-match interviews dripping with sarcasm, not fire. At Roma, he won the Europa Conference League and ran to the stands in tears, as if begging the world to remember he still existed. But even that wasn't enough. In 2024, Roma sacked him mid-season. Another chapter closed. Another cold goodbye. And in those final matches, something was different. He didn't rage at reporters. He didn't defend himself with the same theatrical fury. He looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally. It's as if, after decades of fighting the world, José Mourinho finally realized the battle was no longer out there. It was within. He once said, "Some people try to be clever. I try to be honest." But the world didn't want honesty anymore. It wanted evolution. It wanted energy. And Mourinho, for all his brilliance, his trophies, his unforgettable quotes, had become a man out of time. The real tragedy? He didn't fall because he failed. He fell because he never changed. There's a question that lingers like cigarette smoke around José Mourinho's legacy. Was he a wasted genius or simply a man who refused to bend? For 2 decades, Mourinho redefined what it meant to manage. He wasn't just a tactician, he was a storyteller. He made football personal, tribal, alive. He turned every fixture into a battle of ideologies. When he stood on the touchline, it wasn't just 11 versus 11, it was him against the world. And for a long time, he won. But Mourinho didn't just burn bridges, he incinerated them. His greatest strength, his obsession with control, his siege mentality eventually became his undoing. As modern football leaned toward empathy, communication, and flexibility, he doubled down on loyalty, discipline, and dominance. And maybe that's why he now feels like a ghost haunting a party he helped throw uninvited to the conversations, but impossible to ignore. Still, it would be unfair to dismiss him as a relic. Look beyond the meltdowns and the memes, and you'll find a man who brought tactical clarity to chaos, who elevated underdogs into champions, and who gave fans moments they'll never forget. Porto 2004, Chelsea 2005, Inter 2010, Madrid 2012. Each of those teams shaped in his image, played not just to win, but to prove something. Mourinho believed that the world didn't owe him anything, and he acted like it. That raw ambition, that willingness to be hated was both his superpower and his curse. So, what do we make of him now? Is he a fallen emperor clinging to past glories? Or is he a misunderstood revolutionary punished for refusing to change? Maybe he's both. Maybe the tragedy of José Mourinho isn't that he lost. Maybe the tragedy is he never learned how to lose. And in a world that keeps moving, keeps evolving, keeps softening sometimes, the hardest men are the ones left behind. There's something bittersweet about watching old footage of José Mourinho. The sharp suits, the finger to the lips at Camp Nou, the sprint down the touchline at Old Trafford in the rain. The wide-eyed celebrations, the glances to the sky, the arms outstretched as if to say, "I told you so." Those moments weren't just about goals or titles. They were cinematic. They were the theater of a man who made every match feel like the climax of a war film, with himself as both general and lone soldier. And that's why even now, even after the sackings and the silences, we still remember him. Because for a time, a glorious, unforgettable time, Mourinho wasn't just special. He was necessary. He was the villain and the hero. He gave football an edge, a voice, a drama it didn't know it needed. He made fans feel. He made rivals rage. He made players believe. And while the game may have moved on, replacing him with data models, feel-good managers, and systems more than souls. There is a part of every football romantic that still aches for a sideline prowler with a burning stare and a belief that he could bend the world to his will. Maybe one day, the books will call him a relic, but the memories will call him something else. Unforgettable. Because in the end, legacies aren't defined by longevity. They're defined by impact.